why don't we get started, and as people come in, we'll let them into the room. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Working for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion on the Board session. I'm just going to give you kind of some rules of Zoom. So please stay muted while you are not speaking and be respectful of others. If you would like to speak up during this session, please utilize the raise hand function located when you open the participant list below. You have the ability to use the chat in this Zoom as well to submit in questions, make comments. This session is being recorded, so please keep that in mind. I also want to make a note that any private messages do get downloaded as a host entity. So while your messages privately may be private right now, I will likely see them at the end. So keep that in mind so that way you don't get caught later. I will now turn it over to Clay Hiles from the Hudson.
Welcome everyone again. After Carl's enthusiastic promo, I feel we should go directly to concluding remarks and declare it a success. This session has been, I think, like all of the sessions, and I recognize most of you from having attended earlier since this conference began, and that it represents building on what has happened at the previous sessions, all of which have, I believe, had paid some attention at least to the very, very important question of who's on the boards of the organizations that do the work that we care about. Tonight we're really lucky because the two people who are going to lead us through this discussion are people whose careers have really coincided with the past 30 years of explosion in nonprofit organizations and understanding of what makes them work, what makes them work well, what makes them work not so well. And certainly in the world of the environment, and I go back 30 years and more, the change in the understanding of how the environment is not some separate issue, but involves all the things that we've been talking about for the past few days, that has made great strides. And as everybody who's addressed any of us for the past 3 days has acknowledged, we have a long, long way to go. We live in a corporate world, and even though we may think that we're manning the barricades, we are really reporting usually to a board of directors. And the experience that Dart Westphal and Babette Baker bring to understanding how boards operate, how they get organized, how they carry out their functions, and how they interact with the mission of the organization, and the staff that does the day-to-day work in the trenches. There's nobody who knows more about these things than they do. And partly because they've been doing it for all these years, while our kind of nuanced understanding of what it means to run these organizations, to raise money and carry out the activities has changed dramatically and developed. But also because between the two of them, they have covered just about every imaginable effort in the world of public interest. I would urge you, just so you can kind of smile about what people do with their lives, to read their profiles in the conference materials. If I were to do 1/10 of what they have been doing, tell you about it, we would get truly to the end of the session. Just take it from me, they will speak to you with great authority on not only how boards and organizations operate, but how they operate in different contexts and different kinds of issues, different kinds of important areas of environmental and social justice. So Dart.
Well, thank you. Take it away. Thanks very much, Clay. I do appreciate that rather effusive introduction. Babette and I both work with an organization called the Support Center for Nonprofit Management in its previous name. And we are consultants with not-for-profits working on board development and all kinds of things that we'll talk about as we sort of have a conversation between us that we will invite you all to join into. I want to start by sharing my screen here. And one of the organizations that we are partners with often is called Board Source. Can everybody see my Taking Action on Board Diversity page there? And Board Source is a national organization that helps people on with their governance. And we'll get to the 5 questions, but the first thing I want to start with, and then I'll hand it over to Babette, is how the levels of board diversity have largely remained unchanged since 1994. And that's a little scary. 1917, 90% of chief executives, et cetera. You can read all of this. It really is an example of how far we have to go in a lot of ways. And it's really great to have everybody here thinking about this. And I also want to throw in the idea that we're talking about diversity in a lot of different ways. I left running a not-for-profit to begin thinking about how the next generation of not-for-profit leaders was going to be found and hatched and figured out. And so generationally is a big part of the kind of diversity that we need to bring to not-for-profits. And a lot of that has to do with the kinds of the way the organizations work, how they function, the culture of these organizations in every sense. And it goes for every kind of diversity. But I really got started on this thinking about the next generation of people and how small organizations frequently don't have a bench to call upon when someone like me retires or whatever. So the idea that really hasn't changed a whole lot, and that the other kinds of diversity that we're looking for hasn't really changed very much is sort of a cautionary tale for all of us. I'm going to stop there and stop sharing and hand it over to Babette, who has a little PowerPoint to put up. Babette?
Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to bring up my little PowerPoint and see here. Okay. So Clay made Dart and I both sound like we're about 373 years old combined. With the experience we have, but we have been doing this a long time. So I found some information today, and I will make sure that I get the source to Rosanna so she can share with you. But what I loved about this source that I found is that it actually broke it down by the type of nonprofits. And so the first question was, does your organization have a diversity strategy? And as you can see, even though we've been talking a lot about this, 69% of organizations do not overall. And if you look at the environmental, only, let's see if we can, wrong one. I gotta move my thing over. 76% do not have a strategy. And you can see it broke down by all the other types of nonprofits. And then, so the question is, I gotta move all this so I can see. Hope I don't mute myself. And why did you start or initiate a strategy? And then you can see the breakdown. This was just overall. And so you can see the breakdown of this. And someone just thought, we just wanted a different thought. We realized that we lacked it at our leadership levels. And then you were thinking about your performance. So you can see all these responses. And we'll share this with you. And then how, I think what's really important, and we'll talk about this later, is how are we measuring the progress that we're making with our diversity efforts? And as Dart said earlier, it's not just in terms of race and ethnicity, but are we looking at age? Are we looking at, gender and all those other things? So we wanted to share a little bit of that data with you, and I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, there we go. So I think it's important, for us to start with a baseline. So, do you guys have any idea of like where you are now? So I don't know, Rosanna, can we bring the poll up, or can you launch the poll? Because we'd like to get a feel for like who's in the room. So,
yes,
who are board members and who are staff people? What are your role in the organizations that are on this call tonight?
So I'm going to go and we're going to slightly do it differently. And I'm going to share my screen. We're going to use the lovely Mentimeter, if everyone remembers that from our last conference. And you're going to use that code, mentimeter.com. Use the code 4003197. You can use that on your phone. I've unfortunately been kicked off and my poll now is not pushing out into Zoom. So this is my backup plan. Then this way everyone should be able to respond back. So let's see.
There we go. Thank you, Rosanna. There are all these platforms. This is so interesting. I really am feeling like we have 372 years of experience between us, Dart. Jeez, I've never even heard of this one before.
There we go.
There we go.
This one's fun because it's like you know, you actually see everything populating in real time.
Yeah. Perfect, Georgina. We see that you serve on the board and you are a staff person. Okay.
Yeah, Clay reminded us earlier in our briefing session before this that there are probably a lot of folks here that are staff or executive directors and also board members of other organizations. So you've got both perspectives, and Babette and I both know about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, feel free if you're having difficulties on using Mentimeter, feel free to just type in your response.
Absolutely. And we encourage comments in the chat. As Dart said earlier, we're having a conversation, but we love to hear what people have to say to us or jump in.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the intentionality when we're starting here. I know you meant, when you were going through your slides about whether people have a plan for this or not.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that means, Babette?
Well, what we often find with the nonprofits that we work with and the ones that we hear about through our colleagues is that people want to, they want to start these plans. They want to do something different, but they're not intentional about it. And that really happens a lot with board development and board recruitment. We know that we need to find new members, but we don't really have an orientation process. We don't have a formal way to, introduce our organizations to potential board members and vice versa. It usually tends to happen like, oh my gosh, I met this person at the dry cleaners. We had a great conversation in line. I think they'd be great on the board. Well, okay. Or, my neighbor really likes this organization I'm a part of, and I think they'll be great on our board. And that's fine. And sometimes those things kind of really work out. But what we really don't see a lot of, Dart, is that kind of that real planning effort for folks to really think about, what does this really look like and mean for our board? And I'm not just talking about we need an accountant or we need an attorney, but really, where do we get that diversity of thought from? And how are we intentional about it all the time? So do we have a recruitment committee? Do we have an onboarding process? How are we reaching out to folks that we are interested in? How are we following up with people? How are we paying attention to what our board members are doing? And most organizations just aren't intentional about that.
And I think what we're going to get to a little bit later is the idea that what Babette has just described about the dry cleaner is how a lot of organizations work, and it's starting at the wrong end. You're trying to recruit someone before you've identified a number of people that might even just want to be your friends, meaning your organization's friends, not your friends down the street, which is how people do it often. You're looking for a bigger pool of people who could help your organization who love you. And starting with who you're going to put on the board instead of starting with this larger pool of friends will not get you to the board you really want. It won't get you to the place where you've got a diverse group of people that are doing the kind of things that you want them to do. Let me put up a second thing, and then if there are questions, we're well enough into this that if there's questions that Rosanna can moderate, we can get to them. I do want to say that this is not a universal, there's no universal agreement here on this. That I'm not finding the right document here, but there was a letter in the Chronicle of Philanthropy a little while ago, but I'm having trouble finding on my screen here, about how there's a place, everybody know Guide Source, Candid, they're called now. It's the place where you go when you look up an organization's 990 and you can figure out where all their money is and whatnot. And there it is, in defense of board diversity. Thank you very much for saving me, Rosanna. They have a question now. Guide Source will grade your not-for-profit. They'll publish your 990. You can fill out all kinds of things about how great you are. And one of the questions was, do you have a process that we'll get back to Babette in a second? Do you have a process that leads to finding diverse candidates for your board? That was the question they asked. And someone objected to that. They wrote back to the Chronicle of Philanthropy saying that the board source, the folks I talked about before, should not have gone to GuideStar and put that question in their evaluation of boards. They should not be evaluated about that, because sometimes, quote unquote, single-mindedness is good. You've got a group that is working on X job. Yeah, I see people shaking their heads already, right? This is why we've only got 19% of the people thinking they have diverse enough boards, because it hasn't reached that. It's so far from reaching a level of importance that people will actually write and complain to the Chronicle of Philanthropy, of all places, about being asked whether they're really working on getting board diversity or not. And this document that you, I think, already have and will be sent to you, the authors from Board Source were writing and saying, there's lots of reasons why you want to have a diverse board. In addition to just understanding the community that you're in, if the community that you're in isn't represented on your board, how is the board going to serve that community? And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Babette to see what's next on her PowerPoint.
Well, actually, it was just those couple of slides, just kind of talking about the data. But Dart, you brought up something interesting, and as we were talking about, just using the example of the person at the dry cleaner, and there's nothing wrong with talking to your friend at the dry cleaner, right? But if you are at the dry cleaner in your neighborhood, in your community, is it as diverse, and will you have access to folks who have who are different from you? So not only just in, like, once again, race and ethnicity, but age, income, and we need to think about all those things. Now, I will be honest with you. I'm in upstate New York. I am just a few hours away from the Adirondacks. I grew up camping in the Adirondacks, and I can tell you that very often my family was the only or one of two Black families that we saw when we were there, but we loved it. And so over the years, as I got married and raised children, we camp. We go up on Lake Ontario. We continue to go to Adirondacks. My son went to Paul Smith. We were just hiking in the Adirondacks in the Vic, Labor Day weekend, 5-hour hike, and I ended up busting up my knee, but it was fabulous. I had a great time, and so, but even looking around at that point, I was going, wow, this is literally 40 plus years later, and I'm still not seeing a lot of families that look like me. So what are we doing? So I don't know, the Adirondack Diversity Initiative just kicked off about a year ago. They did hire someone, and they're kind of looking at how are they kind of really attracting a diverse groups to the Adirondacks to participate in all these activities and just really just enjoy the great outdoors. And as Dart and I were thinking about this activity, we realized that one of the challenges that groups who's been groups that are outside, environmental groups, nature groups, you have that extra added issue of like, nobody likes to go outside anymore, right? And not even the kids. So, you know, we're looking around and kids don't want to go outside. They want to play on their video games all the time. So how do we identify and attract folks to get them involved and want to really participate? And so one of the things that we're thinking about is how can these groups begin to then connect with schools and other groups like the 100 Black Men or Black fraternities and sororities, where they can really connect to a diverse group of folks and begin to get them outside and get them a part of. And not necessarily to join your board right away, but just get people familiar with what you do and the kind of things that are happening. And I think that's a great place to start thinking about recruiting and at least just making connections with people. So, and that's why that's one of the reasons why it's important.
And I think the environmental movement has an elitism problem. I mean, we have to be clear about this. It's been a long time for many of us since the first Earth Day, which a few of us are old enough to really remember and have demonstrated during. And it was a stretch between that era and the era of environmental justice. Mm-hmm. And I remember working on lead poisoning when I worked at Montefiore Medical Center, when people didn't necessarily make that connection between health issues, asthma and air pollution, and environmental issues. I mean, it was kind of stunning being in the Bronx in those days and not really seeing a common cause being made between folks that were worried about lead poisoning and paint in people's buildings and mainstream environmental organizations. And so the idea, and that tends to stop communication in both directions. So getting, and it might be just going outside, you know, working in Van Cortlandt Park here in the Bronx and teaching at Manhattan College, getting folks to go outside. You know, the NFL has to have this Play 60 commercial when they're on the football game, right? You're watching the football game, and the NFL say, Play 60 every day, get the kids to go outside. And meanwhile, a quick story. One of the people I worked for at Montefiore was the HR senior vice president. He used to work for ESPN and Disney, right? So Disney has everything. And he used to tell us that they would put borders around the screen of the TV you're watching that would cue your mind to think that you were outside so that you would stay in and watch television. There were actually visual cues in the ESPN show to keep you from going outside. So that leads to how you get folks to get involved in things in general, let alone like younger people that aren't used to being thrown out of the house and told to go out and play every day by their parents. Mm-hmm. Right? Do you have any questions?
Robert says, oh, well, thank you, Robert. Black and Brown professional networks and alumni and Greek organizations. So one of the things that the Adirondack Initiative is doing is they're really kind of beginning to collect people's stories. And I think there was the story, actually I have the magazine here. It was in the September, October edition of the Adirondack Explorer, talking about, you know, a place for all. And the person that they actually hired was living up in Saranac Lake, and she was out taking her morning run, and she happened to run by and someone had a Confederate flag up. And, you know, so she decided, she didn't really say anything, but she decided to move to a different community where she was feeling a little bit more welcoming. And so, you know, my question to the groups that are on the call right now, you know, is even your board at a place where they even want to start having very hard and difficult conversations about what this looks like, and really thinking about what is that message and that language that we're using, you know, and is that language inclusive and welcoming to people? And are we really willing to make a commitment to this so we don't just go and find like the Babette or the son of Babette who's, you know, used to being outside, and putting them on the board. But because the other thing is when we put the one person on the board, right, how inclusive and welcoming is that? If that person is still in that room and still seeing themselves as the only one. So I'm going to share a short story, and you guys can look it up in Syracuse.com. We have an organization in Syracuse called Vera House, domestic violence organization. They've been in our community maybe 30, 40 years. Half of their board just left when they decided to really look at their practices in their organization. And so they actually kind of put out this manifesto about really challenging their policies, their process when they're dealing with families of domestic violence. And the district attorney, who had been on the board for 15 years and had given thousands of dollars to the organization, actually very publicly left the board because he did not like the new language that the organization was using. And I think one of the specific phrases was dismantling racist policies in how we provide services to our clients. And it has just blown up in this community about how challenging that language will be. And so this is what I will say to folks of you who are really looking to diversify your boards. You know, are you really willing to have enough courageous conversations to create very safe spaces for people to show up and actually be a real part of the work that you're doing? And so I will challenge boards who are saying, yeah, we want to do this, to really have those conversations with their board members and their staff before you even start your diversity efforts. Because you're going to find, as you begin to have those conversations and do this work, people may leave. People who've been longtime associates of your organization may leave, and they may stop writing checks. And are you okay with that? And are you ready for that?
I'm going to go back to the 5 questions for board diversity here. The second page's thing, and then bring up one other thing. What does it mean for your reputation is the first thing. What assumptions does your organization make about you based on your board composition? And then these last 3 are all the things that Babette was just talking about. How do we cultivate a deeper understanding of the community or communities that we serve? And if you serve a community that's telling you you have to really work hard to dismantle racism in this organization, and you don't want to listen to that, that's a problem. Are we at risk then of making decisions without understanding how they affect the people that you're dealing? And it doesn't, you know, any community that you're talking about, if you're isolating one portion of the community by only representing one portion of the community, that's what we're talking about here. And then if you can get past these 2 things, if you can agree with Babette that, yeah, people are going to get upset and they might not stay around, that we fully understand how those decisions might be the right thing to do because of the way they're going to affect the people that we serve. And we're making this commitment to not just diversity, but also inclusion and equity, which is my next point. What would that mean for the mission? What would it do for us? And these documents are all available to all of you. The point here that we're going to keep coming back to is this one, number 2, about finding candidates. If you're just relying on your personal networks of current board members, it's not going to work. And the professional associations comment that was in the chat and that Babette made before is kind of what we're talking about. There's another document that I won't share right now, but it's a letter from a person of color who was asked to join a board because he was the person of color. And we can't get too much farther without talking a little bit about tokenism, that you have to look at everything that everybody brings to the organization, and just looking for a left-handed agnostic, as I often say, is not going to help. You know, yeah, we need a left-handed agnostic. Well, you need a whole bunch of things, and you want a board that represents a lot of different skills and a lot of different voices in your organization. And you can't be single-minded, regardless of what that person wrote to the Chronicle of Philanthropy, about who you're looking to attract to your board. And we'll get to that in a few minutes after we take some more questions.
So what I'm loving is there's some great questions in the chat. So there is one, and I'm maneuvering and talking, and so I'm going to go. There are a couple of technical questions, so I want to address those first because those are easy to answer. One question from Isabel was, do you find boards not having term limits a problem? Absolutely. And I know people come on boards. You have founders that actually sometimes roll off boards and become EDs and vice versa. And you love that people have made that kind of commitment to an organization. But it is important, to make sure that you provide room for diversity of thought. And so even when you have people who've been on the board for a very long time, you're thankful that they've contributed, and you're thankful for their commitment, but they really do stagnate the process. So I am a absolute fan of term limits. And when I look at, and one of the first things I do when I go in to do board development work is I look at the bylaws, and if I see, there's no term limits, or if I see somebody can roll off and roll back on and then roll off and then come back again, I'm like, no. It sends up all kinds of signals. Dart, you want to add something to that?
I want to go earlier than that. Are they following the bylaws, period? Is the organization actually having elections? Is there a time when you say, okay, your term is up, would you like to still be on this board? Forget about term limits. Let's make sure they have terms. Or is it a place where everybody's on the board forever? I'm on a couple of those boards now. Can we get folks to actually just follow their bylaws, period? And this is where talking about diversity, inclusion, diversity, and equity blends into just having a board that is functional, that has a process. And I know some of you are representing boards that are still at the kitchen table level, where you've been for 20 or 30 years, right? It's a bunch of folks that want to get something done, and they hang out together and they do those things, and that's fine. But at some point, you have to institutionalize things a little bit and say, okay, we've got to regularize the way we do things. We've got to make sure we have all the skills and representation that we need, and we've got to figure out a process to do that. And then we have to follow it. Babette and I make a living reminding people of what they said they wanted to do and asking them why they haven't done it. Right? She's laughing. This is what you said. Why don't you, they want to do a big strategic plan, and we've got the 5 things in the strategic plan on the website already. Why aren't you doing those things that you said you wanted to do? And how you manage your board is a really, really big one. So not just terms and go through it. And then the other thing, the backside of it, which we'll get to more, is you have to have a pool. Mm-hmm. You have to have a group of people. Half of these problems are because, like, oh no, who's going to be treasurer if Maud doesn't do it? Maud's done the books for the last 47 years. I don't know what's going to happen if Maud leaves the board. How are we? Well, if you don't have a pool of people that love your organization, that have a group of skills that you need, you're never going to replace Maud or Phyllis, the president, who's been president since the place was founded 37 years ago. You've got to have a diverse pool of people from which to choose your diverse board. And I know it's cool because it's how you do everything. And we'll get to that in our third. We're almost to the third question after all, but we'll get to that in a second. And I'll just say, going back to the tokenism problem, the equity and anti-racist statements are absolutely wonderful, Dr. Fanuzzi, thank you. But the getting from just diversity to real inclusion and real equity are a number of steps. There's a long piece from one of the foundations that we will send around as well, that more than we can do in an hour's conversation. But you've included somebody, right? You've become diverse. Excuse me. You become diverse. You've brought in 1 or 2 left-handed agnostics, but everybody knows who the officers of the board are, and that the 2 or 3 leaders on the board, everybody just agrees with what they always say all the time. And so we're not really including anybody in the process, let alone providing equity to a community that is one of the groups of people that we're trying to serve. Like those left-handed agnostics, nobody really cares about what they think, because we just worry about the right-handed people. And so getting from one step to the other is, the anti-racist side of things or the anti-left-handedness. You remember, some of us are old enough to remember when you weren't allowed to write left-handed in school. They forced you to write with your right hand, right? So I'm only being half facetious about that. Getting real equity for people that are getting pens that don't mess up your hand when you write left-handed or whatever, doesn't happen unless there's left-handed people in the room. And then unless they're being listened to and unless their concerns are really being addressed in some way, rather than just saying, well, we have a left-handed agnostic in the room, so we don't have to do anything else. So it's a bit of a rant, but we're all friends here.
And that actually leads into Georgiana's question, and I'm laughing because I actually am left-handed, and I'm old enough to remember being tapped on my hand quite often, telling me not to write with my left hand. So, Georgina asked the question, I fear that the same people of color are getting tapped over and over again. And so let me just say this to you, Georgina, it's not just the people of color. And one of the things that Dart and I always talk about is, when you're an organization, you always want the person who is like the bank president or the person who is the person from your local power authority. I mean, we always want these named people to be on our board. So it's not just tapping the same people of color over and over again. We're tapping the same pool of people over and over again, especially if you're in a small community, right? So, and this is what I always say to people. If you are tapping people to be on your board, no matter what the ethnicity or race is, and if they're on more than 3 boards, they can't do anything for you. They are too busy. They can't commit to you. They'll kind of show up sometimes, and let's just be clear. And if you want them on the board because they can write a check, find something else for them to do, make them the chair of some committee that you don't really care about, but you don't hear me say this, I'm not recording this, let them write their check. But if you want people who work, you can't get people overcommitted. And so it behooves the group, as Dart just said, is how do you build out and expand those networks so you get to a larger pool of people that you're tapping into for boards. Now, I'm going to add this piece too. I am a certified trainer with nonprofit life cycles. And one of the things that we talk about all the time is where in your life cycle is your nonprofit. And it's like it's idea, startup, growth, maturity, terminal, and then turnaround. And what happens with a lot of these organizations is that you have these 4 table legs: your business plan, or how you operate your business, your administrative systems, your governance, and your management. And then your programs are kind of like your tabletop, and those 4 legs support the tabletop. And I'll make sure that I get to Rosanna some information about life cycles. But what happens is, because you usually start your organization around your program, one of your table legs is a little bit longer than the other ones, and that's okay. So what you find is that your management might be a little bit stronger, your programs are really strong, but your governance is not as strong. This is where you need to take a step back and think about, we need to implement, do we have a culture of planning rather? Are we being thoughtful and methodical about the things we're doing, how we're doing it, how we're engaging people? And are we building out an infrastructure that supports the work that we want to do? So that is, do we have money devoted to infrastructure and technology? Are we building out professional development for our board members? Do we have a process in place to recruit new board members and onboard them? And the same thing with our, our staff leadership. And you think this is a little bit like off the conversation, but what Dart and I find a lot of times is that people are not planning for any part of their organization. And so everything just feels so haphazard all the time. And so we can't say this enough time to organizations. Yeah, okay, you want to do this and you say you're doing this, but where is the time and the effort and the investment to make sure that you're getting to that place? So a value statement and equity statement is nice, but where is the real work behind it to get to what you're saying? So.
Everybody's putting out fires and everybody's really busy and nobody is, everybody feels put upon. We're all being forced to do things that we don't want to do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the worst time management problem is not having time to think.
Yes.
So if you haven't, you have to manage your time so that you can think for a minute. Like, why am I doing this? Is this what we should be doing? Sweet spot of something that is financially responsible and also meets your mission. And people are doing things that aren't financially helpful and don't have anything to do with their mission. Some legacy program, it's just an example of what goes on, but you've got to spend time thinking, and that means your governance, if that's the thing where you feel like your leg isn't as long as the other legs. I do want to get to the question about yearly budgets relying on having board members who can make a significant monetary contribution. A lot of that depends, I mean, again, go back to, like Babette said before, go back to your bylaws. What do we say, or your policies, or the expectations for your board members? Sometimes there is a floor. You're just going to have a floor. You must give X. You must become a heritage member, or you must have a gift of this certain amount, or you have to buy 2 tickets to something. And there's really not much of a way around it. But if you can see your way clear to have the requirement be a significant contribution that's significant to that person, it's a way to allow people to participate. And, you know, including those of us that have had not-for-profit careers and don't have deep pockets either, who sometimes have things to give to a board, that you can bring people on that don't have huge amounts of money, but know that they're contributing in a way that's significant. And that is something you have to deal with in terms of the other board members and what the larger expectations are. In the kinds of groups we work with, we're going the other way. We're pushing boards to say, okay, everybody has to make a significant contribution. Sometimes everybody has to make a contribution becomes the thing. If you can see your way clear to make it significant, then a person for whom that's not a huge gift is participating at least as much as someone that can. With that, I want to put my last thing to share here is this triangle. Now, this is about, can everybody see that? Mm-hmm. Right? This is largely around fundraising, and this comes from the fundraising world in terms of finding donors with a $sign up at the top. And the people at Cause Effective are really good at this. And we've learned a lot of what we know about fundraising from Cause Effective. And they will tell you that you're going to spend 50% or more of your effort on fundraising, but also on people that love you and might be on your board on number 1, which is the identification. You're going to identify people who are going to be your donors or who are going to be eventually your board members or your serious participants. With half of your effort is going to be, and it's your outreach thing as well. It's the community outreach. You don't know whether those 100 friends that you found, the members that joined you, even if you're not a membership organization, you can have a membership strategy, getting people to be participants in your organization. That's the pool of people. They're going to want information. How interested are they? Well, now you're cultivating somebody in the fundraising world. You're cultivating a candidate for something. You don't know what they're a candidate for. They could be your biggest volunteer. They could run your volunteer program when you move up to the involvement part, right? So you're working with people, moving them up this pyramid, whether it's time, talents, or treasure. Doesn't matter which of those 3 big things, or wealth, work, and wisdom, whatever 3 letters you like, or whatever letter you like to use in 3s, to get somebody to that point where they're giving you a lot of money, or they are joining your board, they're really involved in what you're doing. And what everybody tries to do is to go for 5 and 6. They start with 6. I need a lawyer who's a left-handed agnostic. Anybody know anybody? And then you're first of all, you've skipped all the other people in your community that you could be talking to. And second of all, the person, and anybody who's been on a board or works with a board knows, you could be finding the absolute person you do not want to have sitting next to you in that boardroom. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody, because I see how many faces I hear nodding. Everybody's been on a board with the person who you just, why ever is that person on our board? What did I do? It seemed like a good idea at the time. You've got to get to know these folks. And each of those steps up through interest and involvement is a time to, first of all, build your community. I mean, that's what we're all in the mission-driven world here. We're all dealing with trying to make something better for somebody, right? Even if the somebody is a fish, we're doing our best to get the world to be a little bit better. And so you're building that community and you're cultivating people, you're talking to people, you're getting them interested in the way you're trying to make the world better. And in that process, you don't know what resource they're going to bring to you. The first volunteer at the Bronx River Alliance, which was founded in the 90s, is still volunteering. Not on the board, not a huge donor, but still volunteer. First person, friend of the EDs, involved in building that community. And it's moving up that ladder that we want people to do.
Right. You know, I'm looking at your faces, and I'm gonna say this to you guys. If you thought this workshop was going to be about, you should tap into these networks and you should do this. And if you do these 3 things and spin around 4 times on a Thursday at 6 o'clock, magic will happen. Dart and I are not those kind of consultants. There is no easy fix to the things that you're thinking about. And all we can is help groups do is really to start to build out the infrastructure for what you want to do, right? You know, and that's the hard work. No, and nobody likes that part, right? People just want to, like Dart said, they just want to go right to 5 and 6 and go, oh my God, we found this wonderful Latina, and she's gonna be, and she is our board diversity. We got a woman and a Latina, and she's divorced, and she's this, and she drives a red Tesla. Oh my God, we're done. Woo! That's not how this works. That's why we go back and start talking about what does your board recruitment process look like? Because this process that you develop for your organization will not only help you attract diversity in terms of age, race, ethnicity, urban, suburban, it will also even help you think about even who's on your board now. And what is this thoughtful process that we use to identify people who really love this organization, want to be a part of it, maybe write a check, maybe not, whatever, you know, volunteer for 27 years and we couldn't get rid of them. If we burned the place down, they'd be there with a bucket trying to put it out. You know, that's what we want you guys to think about, right? What does that really look like for your organization? Because you can find somebody and you can put them on your board, but what is your board culture? You know, they show up at one meeting and no one talks to them. And you think that doesn't happen, but we've seen it happen. You know, there is no welcome, there's no reception or way to welcome that person. That person doesn't always get materials on time. You would be surprised about the kind of things that we've seen happen with organizations over the years. And not just for people who are diverse, but you know, when you have a low functioning, ineffective board, it doesn't matter what you do. You're going to always be a low functioning and ineffective board for all of your board members, and it's going to adversely impact your organization. So you need to really think about what does any of this work look like for our organizations. And so on that note, I will say a few quick things about, okay, here where you can go find some Black and brown people to make you all happy. You know, so we talked about the professional networks. I would suggest also alumni organizations, you know, at any of the schools that you guys have gone to. And I'm a big person about connecting with schools. I used to work for a charter school company, and we had out in Michigan, and there was the Master Gardeners class. And they're like, we really want to get more kids involved in this Master Gardening program. I'm like, well, come and work with us at this school. And I mean, I haven't checked in recently, but a few years ago when I checked in, the Master Gardeners were still coming every year and working with this charter school and working with these kids, you know. So then you begin to kind of cultivate generations of kids who are beginning love to get their hands in the dirt. Now I am the offspring of Southern parents. I grew up with my hands in the dirt. You can't keep me from being outside. And there are lots of folks like me, but a lot of organizations haven't made overtures to me, you know. So you have to just do a little digging, go beyond your networks and find out where these folks are. You know, are there people who are running urban gardens? Are these folks who are involved in the waterways in their community? I mean, I looked at your member list or the people who attended this week. You do have some folks who have come to this conference this week. Make sure that you're continuing to have conversations with them and ask them questions and say things like, I'm not sure how we do this. Do you have any suggestions and recommendations? Right? You know, when you look at your brochure, is your brochure welcoming? Does it, you know, what messages is your brochures or your marketing materials when people go to your website? What message are you sending to people? Does it seem like it's welcoming that people might want to get involved? So you have to be thoughtful at every single step in that process when you're looking to diversify your board, because once again, it's not just getting people there, it's how do we build out equity and inclusion so people really feel like they are a part of this organization, they feel valued as a part of this organization, and they feel like they can really contribute to this organization. So.
I think some of that goes back to the beginning of the conversation about how we haven't really come very far. So if we keep doing what we've been doing, we're going to get the same result. You can't be better and the same. If you want to be better, you have to change, and that scares people. But you can't stay the same and be better. They're like opposites. So something has to change about the way we do things. There was a question in the chat about the next generation. Mm-hmm. And both a generation that is probably knowing my own children who are grown, more comfortable with diversity than I was, and probably still am, right? So, I mean, you know, we have to admit these things. The next generation, both in terms of all kinds of things, is going to want the organizations that they're going to be part of to be different. They're not going to want to come in, and I'm just using age here, but you could put anything in there. You're not going to be able to recruit younger people to a stodgy old organization. Right. The organization is going to have to be a little bit different. They're going to have to do things differently. I mean, I don't know if you follow Alessandra Ocasio-Cortez now in Congress, but she was, you know, forget about the politics. She was saying that she was trying to help congressional candidates who wound up losing, who were spending tiny amounts of money, even on Facebook ads. And there's a couple of generations who have been born that aren't even on Facebook anymore because we are.
Right.
But even that was too much for these old hidebound elected officials, just completely clueless. Right. So I think, as Babette was saying in the beginning, that we have to understand that it's going to be uncomfortable, you know, both because we feel like we didn't do it right before, and I feel bad about that and I don't want to admit it, but also because it's just not the way we do things. Right. And we have to do things differently. People who are different think differently. Doesn't mean they think different things. The entire thought process is different. A younger person has a completely different thought process than I do. I'm sorry. I have to accept that and understand it and know that the organization is going to have to change, right? If it's going to be there after I've decided to do nothing but hike every day, right? Which is coming, by the way, for those of you that know me. So
go ahead there, I'm sorry.
No, that's it.
I was just saying, and I just want to say something. I'm looking at this question from Robert about the new generation of leaders. So why do they necessarily have to join your organization? Why can't your organization nurture this new organization and be partners and collaborators and allies with them, right? I mean, it might be a little bit of a different model, but at the end of the day, you know, I stay connected to Paul Smith because I grew up in the Adirondacks. I love the Adirondacks. I still go. My son went there. He loved it. And it's a beautiful and amazing place for me. So I don't, you know, I go because I love the place. No one has reached out to me. They may or may not reach out to me. But if they did, I think I would get involved. And even if I didn't get involved, I still would love the fact that somebody reached out to me. So if you're looking at these younger groups and they're doing work around the things that you love, support them and nurture them. You don't have to, they don't have to necessarily be a part of your group, but you most certainly can be partners and collaborators in that work. It can look differently now, and that's okay. And just remember, kids don't even like to go outside anyway, so whatever. My grandkids are downstairs right now doing something.
I think the injunction to collaborate and nurture is a perfect way to wrap our conversation up. We have a few more minutes. If somebody wants to add a final thought, I think all the questions in the chat have been addressed, but there may be some sort of summarizing thoughts or questions that occur to you, any of you, that you might want to mention now. If Babette and Dart are 373 years old, I'm at least 374. And I want to say that, and also I came into the environmental movement from the civil rights movement, and I was first appalled, even though I got involved with Clearwater and got a much more compatible view of how the environmental movement could include everybody. But it's taken a very long time. But I was thinking today that, which happens to be the day that Harvard got a break from a judge that lets them go forward with their affirmative action program. Sometimes I think that this board recruitment effort is a kind of affirmative action, but I think it's the kind of terrific affirmative action that rewards us with much more than what we think we're seeking. My experience, and this is why I get to pontificate after 374 years, has been universal, and every organization where I've worked on this issue, that we go into it thinking that what we really want is to have just the glory of diversity. And what I have found, that we get the glory of diversity, but in the effort, and it's hard work, as all of you have mentioned, when you succeed, you find out that you haven't just gotten diversity, you've gotten some terrific board meetings. Their skills, their intellectual qualities, their ability to behave like a terrific board member, all of those things I have found over and over again as the reward of really determined outreach. This is my little sort of uplift at the end of the day, but I believe that very strongly, and I think that you can see from what Babette and Dart have been telling us that's something with all the struggle that's really worth keeping in mind.
So there's a question in the chat about how are we defining diversity. So I'm going to say this. I actually am part of an advisory committee in my community, and I work with the Gifford Foundation. I actually helped create a board development program around board diversity. And I remember we were sitting around that room, and in Syracuse, I think Black folks are probably about, in the city proper, we're about 60% of the population. In the county, we're about 17. I think our Latino population is about 12 or 15 in the city, and in the county about 6 or 7%. But then and Gifford was one of the few funders that actually asked questions about board diversity on their grant applications. And what we realized is that there were some women, but mostly white males. And then we realized, so this was really way beyond Black and brown, right? This was around age. This was around varying abilities. This was around economic diversity, because everybody on the board looked the same. They were kind of like in that same professional circle. And it was really interesting because when we looked at the board diversity for our community, it said that we actually beat the national average. We were thinking, like, how is that possible? But they literally had the same 5 or 6 people almost on every single board in our community. It was crazy. And so, so Michael grew up in Syracuse too. Yeah. So I want to challenge you to think about not just, you know, Black and brown, but, you know, is our programs, are the things that we do, are they accessible to people with varying abilities, you know, who might want to enjoy the things that you do. So I'm going to challenge you guys to really like throw the gates open, you know, really think about what that looks like for you beyond just race and ethnicity, you know. And the question was specifically about Arab descent and why they may consider themselves as white. I think there's a diversity of thought there. So
if you know your community and you look around the boardroom, you're going to know who's not there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And plan, be intentional. And if you're not really ready to kind of, you know, reach out to diverse communities, don't do it until you're ready. And think about the culture on your board. Those are like my closing words of thought.
And mine are make lots of friends, make lots and lots and lots and lots of friends. Outreach in your community, know your community.
And go to different communities too.
Yeah.
Go to their dry cleaners.
Not your neighborhood and your block. That's not what I meant. Thank you, Babette. Keeping me straight.
Well, thank you, everyone. That will conclude today's session. Have a good night. And I want to just virtual round of applause for our panelists today. Really appreciate all of your thoughts and wisdom that you shared today. So thank you so much. Have a good night. And let's keep the conversation going on Hoover, on our community boards, and the many sessions we have tomorrow to close out the week. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.